Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today I will analyze the case of Dean Cummings. First, I'll look at the background of this case, move to the timeline of the incident, then offer my analysis. Dean Cummings was born on September 19, 1965, in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He lived with his parents Boyd and Carol Cummings, as well as 4 siblings. When Dean was 6, his family moved to Los Alamos, New Mexico. His father worked as an electrical engineer at the Los Alamos National Laboratory. Dean struggled in school. He had dyslexia and sometimes attended special education classes. He was described as aggressive and was involved in many fights. Dean was a terrible driver and often exceeded posted speed limits. One time when he was 17, he was caught by the police driving 160 miles per hour on a motorcycle. Sometime around the age of 18, Dean became active in skiing. Using a Dodge van, which he called the Love Machine, he drove to different areas, including Colorado, in order to find skiing opportunities. To make money, Dean worked in construction and grew marijuana. In 1991, he traveled to Valdez, Alaska, to compete in the World Extreme Skiing Championship. He won this championship 4 years later, in 1995. That same year, Dean established a helicopter skiing company called H2O Guides. He would lead groups of people to mountains and guide them as they skied down. In 2001, Dean married a woman named Karen. The couple had a son and 2 daughters between 2003 and 2013. The helicopter skiing business was profitable. Dean sometimes earned as much as $300,000 a year. His family had access to the finer things in life. For example, they owned 2 boats and an airplane. The lifestyle was not without its risks. Dean sustained multiple broken bones after skiing off an 80-foot cliff. This wasn't the only time he was injured, but Dean always managed to bounce back. In 2011, Dean started another company which sold his own line of skis. Dean had developed a terrible reputation in the helicopter skiing industry and in the town of Valdez. He was antagonistic, aggressive, and sometimes put people in fear for their safety. He was well known to law enforcement. In 2015, due to her husband's antagonistic behavior and chaos in the company, Karen resigned from H2O. According to Karen, in November of 2016, Dean had some type of mental health break. He was paranoid. Karen urged him to go to treatment and even made appointments for him, but Dean always missed the appointments. In January 2017, Karen obtained an order of protection against Dean, which she later withdrew at his request. On June 20, 2017, Karen left Dean and took the 3 children with her. She flew to Chicago, Illinois, and obtained a protective order. A divorce followed in 2018, during which Karen won sole custody of the 3 children. The judge indicated that Dean was delusional and paranoid. Dean had been accustomed to going downhill quickly, but this time he was out of control. All his employees quit, and he moved to Wyoming. Eventually, both his companies went out of business. In January 2019, Dean uploaded a bizarre 20-video series to his YouTube channel. The series was called How a Criminal Syndicate Tried to Destroy a Man's Company and Life. In the videos, Dean talked about various conspiracy theories. He named a number of people who he believed were involved in a conspiracy against him. In the last video, number 20, Dean just cut off in mid-sentence, and that was the end of the series. To say that the videos did not seem well planned is a bit of an understatement. Dean Cummings moved around a bit, spending time in Colorado and California before ending up with his parents near Albuquerque, New Mexico. In December 2019, Dean became interested in buying a ranch in San Luis, New Mexico. This is about 60 miles northwest of Albuquerque in Sandoval County. It is a very rural area. There is nothing out there. Dean thought the ranch would be ideal for running a guiding business for hunters. The owner of the ranch was a troubled landscaper named Guillermo Arreola. Dean offered Guillermo $300 a month to live in a trailer on the property. This was supposed to be like a trial run. By living there for a while, Dean could make an educated decision about whether he wanted to purchase the property. In early 2020, Dean moved into the trailer as negotiations continued. Now moving to the timeline of the incident. On Saturday, February 29, 2020, at 5:31 p.m., a retired physician assistant named David McCullough called the police. He said, quote, "So the reason I'm calling is I ran into a guy here who says he was attacked at a ranch, and he wound up pulling a gun and shooting the guy who attacked him. And he can't get cell service, and he asked me to call 911, unquote. At 5:43 p.m., Dean Cummings called 911 and said that he shot and killed Guillermo in self-defense. When the police arrived at the ranch just before 7 p.m., they confronted Dean outside the trailer and placed him under arrest. Inside the trailer, officers found 47-year-old Guillermo dead. He was face down on the floor. There were 2 gunshot wounds in his body, one in his head and one in his collarbone. In his right hand, there was a can of mace with the nozzle pointed toward Guillermo. The police learned that he had been shot with Dean's Sig Sauer rifle, chambered in .556 NATO. The rifle was just outside the trailer. The police claimed that Dean refused to identify himself. He made several statements which appeared to be associated with paranoia. For example, Dean said, quote, "Right after I came out of the house and started washing myself off, a plane came down and circled the property 3 times. This is a pretty big operation, whatever it is," unquote. Dean indicated that Guillermo attacked him, and during this fight, Dean was sprayed with some type of burning chemical agent. He left the trailer after the shooting and changed his clothes in his vehicle in an effort to get the chemicals off his body. The police claimed that there were no signs of a struggle in the trailer, and they didn't find any evidence that mace had been sprayed. Despite the key role that mace played in Dean's story, officers never tested the clothing for mace. They actually never tested anything for the chemical. 54-year-old Dean Cummings was arrested and charged with murder, concealing identification, and tampering with evidence. On March 3, 2020, a grand jury indicted him on second-degree murder, as well as the other 2 charges. Dean made some bizarre statements in court and was sent for a mental health evaluation. He was found not competent to stand trial. However, this changed in March 2021. His trial started in the fall of 2022. Right away, the prosecution suffered a setback. The concealing identification and tampering with evidence charges were dismissed by the judge. This is because the police never asked Dean his name, and they never tested for chemicals. They could not disprove Dean's story that he cleaned up and changed his clothing because he had been sprayed with mace. The state, of course, still had the most serious charge to pursue, second-degree murder. Dean took the stand in his own defense. Here is what he said. Not long before the shooting, he and Guillermo met with the real estate agent about buying the ranch, but the agent pressured Dean to sign the contract without talking to an attorney. Dean wasn't happy about this, but he still wanted to save the deal. On February 29, 2020, Guillermo showed up at the trailer. He appeared to be intoxicated. As the men talked about the purchase, Dean accused Guillermo of being a scammer. This angered Guillermo. He said, "I'm going to kill you." Guillermo attacked Dean with a black object in his hand, pushed him to the ground, and they fought in the kitchen. Maintaining the attack, Guillermo drove Dean into a bedroom where Dean retrieved his rifle. Guillermo grabbed the rifle and was trying to get it away from him. Dean was holding onto the rifle for dear life, certain that he would be killed if Guillermo managed to get the weapon. Functioning in self-defense, Dean fired the weapon and killed Guillermo. After the killing, Dean realized that, during the course of the fight, he had been sprayed with some type of chemical. Dean's testimony on the stand appeared to be pretty convincing. On November 9, 2022, Dean Cummings was found not guilty of second-degree murder. After having been in jail awaiting trial for 2.5 years, Dean was free to go and continued with his life. Now moving to my analysis. Before I weigh the evidence in this case, let's take a look at Dean's history of bizarre behavior and unusual beliefs. Dean was described as always being in conflict with people. He was antagonistic, irritable, and his mood could change abruptly. His ex-wife Karen stated that in November 2016, it was like something cracked open in Dean's brain. Dean told her that there were people telling him that she was doing horrific things with other men and trying to poison him. These informants were communicating to Dean through the walls. Karen described Dean as frightening and a completely different person. Dean continued making wild accusations, saying that Karen had been cheating with 50 different men. Karen said that he would get in her face and say things like, "What are you plotting, and where are you going?" He would go through her personal belongings, like her underwear drawer and her purse, and wrestle her phone out of her hands. Although Karen had a front row seat to this behavior, other people reported disturbing behavior as well. For example, Dean believed that someone had built an underground pipeline into his house and was filling it with poison gas. He thought that a straw in a soda can was a listening device. He would sometimes get on his hands and knees and smell carpets. He insisted that the Exxon Valdez oil spill and the attacks on 9/11 were part of a conspiracy. He was on a mission to expose it all. And Dean told people that he was carrying a mouse in his jacket pocket. The job of the mouse was to taste his food. Presumably, this was to test for poison. When Dean was living with his parents in 2019, he said that he thought a Scottish castle had been stolen from his family. He also accused his mother of poisoning the water in the shower and stealing checks from sponsors. In a letter to a friend, Dean talked about how a criminal syndicate was determined to take over corporations and estates, run mortgage and shell company scams, and engage in chemical and drug terrorism. Dean's behavior could point to various mental disorders, but the results of any assessments have never been released. Furthermore, none of his mental health history was admissible at trial. Dean Cummings maintains his innocence, and he was found not guilty. He can never be tried again in connection with the death of Guillermo. The state of New Mexico respects the jury verdict, but of course they believe Dean was guilty. This brings me to the question, was Dean guilty of murder, or did the jury make the right decision? Let's take a look at the evidence both for and against the idea he was guilty, starting with the inculpatory factors. Dean had multiple negative interactions with law enforcement prior to Guillermo's death. Just like his mental health history, this information was not admissible. Dean shot and killed Guillermo, but Guillermo only had a can of mace. The nozzle of the canister was facing toward Guillermo, and the police said there was no evidence that mace had been sprayed. It seems strange that Guillermo would have attacked Dean while Dean was holding a rifle or had access to a rifle. What was Guillermo hoping to achieve? Moving to the exculpatory factors, Guillermo was a troubled man with a history of violence. He had been arrested for fighting and had other disputes with people in the area. A neighbor testified that Guillermo attacked him and sprayed him with a can of mace on July 9, 2017, about 2.5 years before the shooting. At the time of his death, Guillermo had cocaine and alcohol in his system. As far as the nozzle of the mace canister being pointed toward Guillermo, this is not unexpected. Dean never said that Guillermo sprayed him. Rather, he implied that some mace came out during the fight, like Guillermo was using the canister of mace to beat Dean. As far as the claim by the police that there was no sign of a struggle in the trailer, there was a propane heater on the floor. Something had knocked it down. An analysis of bullet trajectory revealed it was consistent with Dean's description of the confrontation. When considering all the evidence in this case, do I believe that Dean Cummings was guilty of murder? No, I believe he was not guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. The jury made the right decision. Do I believe that Dean was guilty in reality? I'm not sure. This is a tough case. There's really just not enough evidence to know what happened in the trailer. It's possible that Dean was in the wrong, but Guillermo had a bad reputation too, and he was high on cocaine. If I had to guess, I would say that Guillermo was the aggressor. Therefore, Dean was not guilty in reality. What do I think happened in this case? This is just a theory, my opinion. Dean Cummings appeared to be paranoid and aggressive. There is no way to know if he had a mental disorder or not, but either way, his behavior negatively affected his life. He found himself divorced, his businesses closed, and he alienated many people. Out of some fanciful effort to build another business, Dean ended up on the ranch in New Mexico owned by Guillermo. Just like Dean, Guillermo had a history of disturbing behavior. Both men were unpredictable. Consistent with Dean's paranoid beliefs, he started accusing Guillermo of wrongdoing. For example, Dean called him a scammer. Guillermo, who was high on cocaine, reacted poorly and attacked Dean. In response, Dean used a rifle to terminate the confrontation. Dean may have provoked Guillermo, but this may have been due to mental health symptoms. It was not done deliberately. Essentially, during an altercation between two unstable people, the unstable person with the rifle was victorious. The police had no idea how to run a homicide investigation, and they didn't believe it was necessary to collect evidence because of Dean's mental health symptoms. They thought for sure he would be found guilty. When Dean went before the judge and behaved strangely, this only reinforced the idea that he was mentally ill and he would be crushed by the state. Nobody was worried about getting a conviction in this case. By the time Dean went to trial, he appeared to be stable. For instance, there was no indication that he was paranoid, and of course the state was not allowed to bring that up. When Dean testified in his own defense, he was extremely effective. He seemed like a rational person telling a story about an irrational person who attacked him. Furthermore, the long list of bad behavior by Guillermo, including his cocaine use, greatly weighed in Dean's favor. Now moving to my final thoughts. Dean's ex-wife Karen spoke to the media and said something I found to be particularly interesting. During the years that she was with Dean, she grew conditioned to his behavior. She did not know what she was dealing with. Over the years, I have found this to be a pretty common situation for those who are in romantic relationships with people suffering from mental health symptoms. Like they only realize how bad it was when they get away from the relationship. It's amazing how well people can rationalize and tolerate all types of terrible behavior by a romantic partner. Bizarre behavior is interpreted as being normal. It no longer seems embarrassing, worrisome, or destructive. The lesson learned here is how it is critical to look for an outside and neutral perspective when in a romantic relationship. This is why it's so important to never be isolated in any romantic relationship, because attempting to assess its toxicity from the inside makes the evaluation unreliable. Those are my thoughts in the case of Dean Cummings. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you soon. Just a reminder that I have a Patreon account that features over 300 pre-release videos. When I put a video in pre-release mode, it stays that way for quite some time, usually months, if not a year. I will put the link to my Patreon account in the description for this video.